Welcome everyone to the Smith.ai Master Series, where we do bi-monthly webinars on a variety of topics related to sales and marketing, specifically to help small business owners and law firm owners really operate their firms and businesses much more efficiently, productively, and profitably. So today we have one of our partners here from Your Practice Mastered. We have Richard and MPS. I'm going to give them the floor, let them introduce themselves, talk about their consultancy company, and we're going to end up talking about a really great topic here on sales and sales skills, something that even folks that go into business may not know that they need, but they certainly do. And that's what we're going to dive into today. So, Richard, why don't you begin?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to bring hopefully a piece of the pie that might be missing out of small business owners. As we talked about offline, Michael and I really spend our focus on working with law firms. I would argue to say if we can make this work in a law firm, we can make this work anywhere, right? Running a business is hard. Running a law firm is even harder, more difficult in many ways. And so, if whether you're under whatever service professional roof, or you're a home service professional, or whatever it is you do, this idea of being able to learn how to sell well will improve most other metrics. As a matter of fact, Michael, I think you'd go on as far to say, like, you feel you need to get that right before you get anything else right, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, sales is the lifeblood of your business. And so getting that right is essential and produces consistency that gives you the confidence to invest in the business and obviously grow it. As a side note, I'm MPS. I'm partners with Richard James in Your Practice Mastered. And yes, you nailed it. We do coaching, consulting, and training for law firms primarily. And I'm excited to dive in today. I've personally coached, conducted, or scored over 5,000 initial consultations. So I've got a thing or two dialed in on the sales front that I'm excited to share. So I appreciate, Tom, you having us on.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and my credibility, Tom, is I'm just old, right? So I've got a lot of time. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've lost count as to how many sales consults I've actually done in my career. But it's been a lot of fun. If for those of you who don't know, I know you could probably tell because we both look alike and we're such dashing great looks. If you're watching this on YouTube, we are father and son, Michael and I. He luckily for him, he didn't get my hairline. And but it's been a real joy for me to watch my son graduate as an expert into this particular class. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say to everybody today.
Awesome. Really, really cool. So here's the first question, guys. We have a lot of folks that go into business, they start their own law firms, whatever the niche is that they're focusing on, and they may not have the sales chops when they begin. When did they get to the point where they realize, hey, even though I didn't plan on being a salesman, I am, whether I want to or not, in this role as the business owner? When did they reach that point, and what do they do about it?
Michael?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And what I would tell you is it's usually not until the point that they recognize whatever their business is a business. And so they've got to come into this perception and perspective that their law firm, their plumbing company, it's a business that they're running. And then once they recognize that and have that perspective shift, because so many of them come into their business as a practitioner of whatever it is they're doing, right? A practitioner of law, a practitioner of being an electrician, whatever it is that they may be doing. And it's hard to make that switch in your mind to not only am I a practitioner, but I'm also running a business. And so it's not until that switch happens that they start to recognize not only the importance of being in the sales role, but the importance of sales in general. Rich, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. The mind is the first place the awareness happens. The second thing I will tell you is, I think, plus oneing on what Michael said. Once they have that awareness, then once they find out the truth, and here's what I mean by that. A lot of small business owners we meet, mainly in the law, but since I've been doing this a long time, all the small business owners I've met oftentimes feel, especially if they're the ones doing the initial consultations or they're the ones doing the sales process, they tend to think their standard of excellence is, boy, if you just put me in front of them, I'm going to close that deal. Like, they think they're an excellent closer. And when I say the truth, once they understand how to put a system of measurement in place that exposes what's really going on in their firm, Michael, we find out that it's not necessarily true that they're great at closing. Is that correct?
Not quite. The standard answer I get, you said it, but the standard answer I get whenever I talk with a firm that doesn't necessarily have their metrics in line yet is, yeah, you put me in front of someone 80% of the time, they'll turn into a client, right? It's always 80% or above. The reality is what we've found is an average firm that initially starts tracking their close rate is 33.7%. That's the average close rate that we see when initially starting the measurement process.
Yeah, so to say that differently, Tom, 10 people walked into the law firm or into the business, or the business walked into the house, whatever it was. They have a real problem that this business can solve. And less than 4 of them are actually allowing this particular business to solve that problem for them. So they have a need. They've raised the hand. They were interested in you for some reason. You got as far as meeting with them virtually or in person or kneecap to kneecap, however it goes down. And less than 4 out of 10 said yes to retain that firm. And most small businesses think, well, it must be my pricing. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
So
we have found if you do this right, you should take that number from 4 out of 10 to at a minimum 7 out of 10. And the really good ones can get 8 or 9 out of 10.
So if it's not pricing, where does it seem to be going wrong? Let's talk about what the unsuccessful business owners are doing first before we start getting into what the successful ones are doing.
Systems. So there's no structure or system in place for their sales. So it's kind of ad hoc in a way. Who's taking the initial consultation? When we're running the initial consultation, are we following a script and a structure? Are we just kind of dynamic depending on each conversation with each prospect? And so the lack of systems is what creates these inconsistencies in the sales results, right? Maybe one week you get an 80% week, but then the next week you got a 12% week, and then you got a 23% week. And so it's these inconsistencies across the board. So the lack of sales systems is traditionally the root and at least the starting point of what the unsuccessful sales processes look like.
Yeah, and I would plus one on what Michael said and add this. He said it. I'm going to say what he said in a summary statement. Most small businesses attempt to customize every single sales consultation to meet the individual prospect, as opposed to developing a script and structure they run every prospect through. So they think, I'm going to close every deal, rather than I'm going to use a structure and a system that's going to maximize the number of deals that I close. Did I say that correctly, Michael?
Yeah, you did. We like to call it the black box, right? Implementing a black box structure that we pass every single initial consultation through. Doesn't matter who it is, what it is, everybody goes through the same exact consultation script and structure every single time. And the good news about that is you can consistently depend on the backside results. Because you're passing everybody through the same structure, you can consistently depend on 60 to 80% close rate week in, week out.
When you talk about structure, I think a lot of people's minds immediately go to a CRM, or in the case of legal, practice management system. That's only one component, I imagine, of what you're talking about. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the term system, and help paint a clear picture around that for me.
That's a great question. So I think it is easy to default by structure. We go to software, we go to systems, and the reality is those are a component of what we're talking about, right? You want to be streamlined in that sense. But what we're speaking of is when an initial consultation comes in, what are the words we're using? Like, what is the process we're using during the initial consultation? Do we have a step-by-step structure that we're following every single time and using the same script and words every single time? And it's dialing that script, that structure in. That's what having a true sales system and process allows us to do. Rich, would you agree with that?
Yeah. You mind if I share my screen real quick if I can illustrate this? Let me just see if I can, let me just real quick. I won't take up much time with this, but let's see.
Let's see it.
Share my screen? There it is. Great.
He's
Can you
visual.
see my drawing board here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great. So let's think of it in a 10-step system. I'm not saying that's the number of steps it should be. It doesn't matter. That's irrelevant for the purpose of this. If you had 10 steps, and let's say the first one is welcome, the second one is what we call hell, the third one is what we call heaven, and I'm not suggesting this is the right order. This is what you should do for your business. But for the purposes of this discussion, what Michael is saying is black box. He's saying we need to be able to say the same things. I would go as far as saying we call this checklist selling. So you should be able to say, okay, this is the first thing I'm supposed to do. This is the second thing I'm supposed to do. This is the third thing I'm supposed to do. So we use a checklist to make sure we follow the structure and the script. So every one of these will have words that you will say, and they all have a structure that you will say. And so if we can get them to understand that using a checklist will allow them to bring consistency. So what Michael said earlier was some weeks you close 85%. Now, the challenge is that's the one that everybody remembers. They'd seem to forget about the weeks that they closed 18% or 12%, right? And so what happens is the right close rate for your firm, for your practice area, for your business might be 65%. I don't know. There's a lot of depends. I don't mean to sound like a lawyer, but it does depend on a number of factors. But it depends on what your scenario is, what it should be. Well, the only way to figure out what it should be is to create a system that you use every single solitary time. And then once you use that system, what happens is you can start to develop consistency. Now, if your consistency is at 50% and what you would like to do is get to 60%, well, now all you do is go into your checklist and you start to mess with the script. You start to mess with what you say or how you say it or when you say it. You start to mess with your offer. You start to mess with your pricing structure. You start to mess with your guarantee statements. You pull on these different levers. Each one of those checkpoints would be considered a lever. You pull on every one of those levers little by little. And as you get better at it and better at it and better at it, your conversion continues to go up. Michael, we've seen firms that started with you at 30%. They started using the system and they could get to 60% pretty quickly, which sounds amazing, and it is. But they could get to 75 or 80%. And the way that they start to march towards that 75 or 80% is to start pulling on those levers and getting better at those and changing those a little bit here or there. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, traditionally a firm that has no structure system to begin with, the moment you put one in, you're usually able to bump results quite a bit pretty quickly. So the key is from there, to your point, Rich, taking each of the individual levers, pulling on them and figuring out, how do I change delivery? How do I change the way I work through objections? How do I change the words I say in some scenarios? And each of those levers has an impact point. And even if we can move it a couple percentage points here or there, I mean, that's dollars in the business, right? And so it's pulling each of those levers. That's something we'll come back to quite a bit, Tom, is those levers.
Absolutely. Let's go off in a new direction for just a minute. So there's obviously a lot of methodologies out there, selling methodologies. Sandler is the one that I've been through, and I've read a couple of his books. I don't know if you guys subscribe to any particular methodology, but one of the things that I find most compelling about Sandler is it really takes the onus off the salesperson's personality, regardless of them being introverted or extroverted or being animated, and it really makes it all about what you're talking about, which is structure. If you're consistent, if you find that right approach, even if you don't have the salesperson personality that people think, oh, you're such a salesperson, you can make it work and you can be successful if you put the right building blocks in place. Do you guys follow Sandler system or another methodology, and does it bode perfectly well with what you guys preach on the structure side, on the system side?
Yeah, so I think you nailed it. There's a lot of methodologies out there, right? Sandler's one, very familiar with, and there's a lot of different approaches. Some we agree with, some we disagree with, depending on the style. And so our approach is very much that checklist selling approach. And absolutely, to your point, the good news about a checklist is you could be introverted, you could be extroverted, but guess what? You got a checklist that you're following every single time. So to your point, it takes the need for being this creative salesperson and really whining and dining somebody and getting them all excited. It takes the need for that out and puts in place the structure that you could follow. And so, Rich, I think you tend to agree with me on that.
Yeah. So MPS, I would tell you that as an example. So we had a young man that there was a window of time where we thought we were going to actually sell on behalf of law firms, and we were building an agency of sales agents for them. And we ended up finding out it wasn't a business we wanted to be in for lots of different reasons. Without going into all that, just suffice it to say, as entrepreneurs, we tested it, we tried it, we decided we didn't like it.
Yeah.
So we had these agents that were left, and they are different than we are. So I am very animated, demonstrative, loud, a little bit too much sham wow, probably, if I'm honest, right? Michael is less of that than I'm. He is much more controlled and smooth. And then we had a young agent who he was even more subdued than both Michael and I. Very much came across, I don't mean this negatively because I'm a man of God, but a preacher's son, right? Very calm, cool, like, and not demonstrative at all, and just an easygoing kind of personality. And what's interesting is when we try to drop him into our world, we would call this the major leagues of selling, where you have to sell to lawyers. Lawyers have a black belt in verbal judo, right? I mean, they're just really, really good at verbal jousting. And so you got to be at the top of your game to close these deals. And so you got to use personality a lot of times to overcome it. And because his personality didn't fluctuate all that much, we found it didn't work great in that regard. But he was able to then take that same conversation, same script, same structure we use with different words, and worked in a law firm setting, and he closed at 85%. It still is, day in, day out, and is killing it for that firm. Now, what is the lesson we learn here? Well, the lesson learned is, yes, in most cases, you don't have to be extraordinarily personality driven to close certain deals. And for most regular business, especially business to consumer environments, you can take a regular person without a tremendous amount of personality they're relying on, have them rely on a script and a structure, and they will close at the top end of the market. There are exceptions to this. And when you're in a specialty setting, like we are, where we have to close deals with lawyers, we have to rely on not just the script and structure, but also our strength of knowledge of the industry and our personality to close a lot of deals. Michael, do you think I hit that correctly or no?
Yeah, I think you know that spot on. And sometimes that's the key right there, putting the right person in the right setting. Structure was the same, just was a different setting for that individual. And so sometimes that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things in the Sandler system that I'm big believers in, and I imagine that it's probably found in other methodologies too. And that's upfront contracts and in addressing like objections and stalls like right out of the gate, instead of waiting for them to be in the driver's seat, the buyer to be in the driver's seat to present those, and you're just hoping and wishing that they don't come up, right? Stay in the driver's seat and you be the one to control those parts of the conversation. Talk to me about those, the upfront contracts and securing the next step before you wrap up, and stalls and objections and addressing those head on, because I think those are two really important parts of salesmanship.
You're right about that. I would tell you the staying in the driver's seat's essential. So you have to stay in the driver's seat the whole time. And the key is giving the prospect a voice through the consultation, right? The prospect has to feel like they're in the driver's seat, but really you're the one in the driver's seat. So the way you're doing this is you're usually asking questions. So there's a lot of questions, and you're staying ahead. So you're one step ahead the entire time. And through that, using the right script, you can make sure you develop that process in a way where you're staying ahead the whole time. You're in the driver's seat, and you're pre-overcoming objections before they become objections because of the way you're delivering that process. So that way, when you get to that closing question there at the end, you either A, already know what to expect from an objection standpoint because you've identified kind of where they're at in their process, or B, you've set yourself up to eliminate some of the objections that would have come up. That's what I would say about the staying in control. But Rich, I'll pass it over to you from an upfront contracts perspective.
MPS, what's your statement about emotion versus logic when it comes in the sales process?
Yeah. Look, prospects make emotional buying decisions and they justify it with logic. So we have to be able to get to the emotional side of the prospect and then bring logic to those emotions, right? We still have to provide a logical path forward and give logical reasons and explanations for why we're going through this process. But if we never get to that emotional part, which is really where the prospect is in control of the consultation, then it's very difficult to get to the other side of getting a deal closed because we never really got to the emotions, and that plays such a huge factor in whether or not that prospect decides to move forward.
Yeah, and I think law firms lend themselves more easily to these emotional connections, divorce, custody issues, criminal situations, bankruptcy, estate planning, immigration. You're dealing with some very heavy emotional connections.
Mhm.
And so I think it's easier than maybe a plumber has or a carpet cleaner has.
Sure.
But I promise you they're there. The plumber or the carpet cleaner just has to take a moment to think it through, to figure out how to make the emotional connection based on the decision that they're making. And so that's where I'm at with this. So what happens is, as Michael said, it's question-based selling. And the questions are designed to, you never really ask a question you don't already know the answer to, right? So it's very much designed to allow for a controlled input by the client that you pretty much know what the answer is going to be. But you never let them know that you've heard this 1,000 times because you don't want to make them feel unworthy or not special. And then once you lead them down that path, to your point about objections, Tom, we actually overcome objections before they come up. So when you craft your script and your structure, you're crafting it in a way that leaves very little room for objections. However, when those objections do come up, you want to put those objections in a box and make sure you lock them down, and make sure you overcome them. Now, here's where most people, when it comes into objections, and by the way, this is an art into itself, but the number one thing I can give people about overcoming objections, I guess there'd be three things. One, let's overcome them before they come up by using a proper script and structure. Two, when they come up, let's make sure we put them in a box. So we make sure we identify all the objections before we address any of the objections and put them into a box. And then after we've overcome all of the objections by asking and telling stories, we have to make sure, and this is the number one rule, you have to make sure after you overcome the objection, you come back and you just say something like, I think we should get started, don't you? What do you think? Should we get started? Some version of that matches your personality. Because if you don't ask and you just overcome the objection, we leave it hanging there. And now we've left the driver's seat and we've given the driver's seat to the client. You know, the old saying is in a salesperson versus prospect role, the salesperson is doing the asking, the prospect is doing the answering. And if you allow the prospect to ask all the questions and you answer all the questions, we've now reversed the role and you've lost control over it. Back to the question about contracts. We address all of the objections in the contract in advance in the way that we said. And for us, a deal's not a deal, and this is in law, okay, and in our business. A deal's not a deal until a financial arrangement has been made. Now, where a lot of law firms get stuck is they think they closed the deal, and then they say something like, okay, I will email you our retainer agreement. I will email you our engagement letter. I will whatever. They will email you something. You sign it and send it back with your credit card information and give it back to us, and then we'll get started. Well, now we've lost control over the situation. So,
and you've probably lost the deal too, by the way.
Probably lost the deal, right?
How should they do that differently then?
Go ahead, Michael.
Get the payment during the initial consultation. So collect payment during the initial consultation. If your firm or your business does payment plans, collect the initial payment. Figure out what they can do as far as a down payment, build a plan out for the rest, and make sure that plan is scheduled. And if for some reason you're in a business or a practice area where your prospects are a little cash strapped and they may not have something available to them during the initial consultation, at the very least, figure out when they're paid next. set up a scheduled payment for when they're paid next, and collect the details of the card, the bank account, whatever it is, during the initial consultation, and schedule that initial payment. Now you've got commitment. The scheduled payment isn't the highest form of commitment, but it is still a commitment over and above just saying, hey, we'll give you a call back next Friday when you get paid, right? So that's what we've got to do, is we've got to get it during the initial consultation.
So this seems to be one of the most prevalent problems in sales. It doesn't matter what industry, right? Law, home services, SaaS.
Yeah.
You see all these, thought leaders on LinkedIn and across the space that talk about this particular problem really in detail. Why is this such a problem? Why do salespeople, business owners struggle with this one in particular? Are they lazy and forgetting to ask the right questions? Are they nervous because they're talking about next steps before they feel like the prospect is ready? Are they nervous because it gets to the point where they're talking about money? Why is this one in particular so problematic for salespeople?
I think it's the conversation around, sorry, Rich, I think it's the conversation around money. I think people stall up in that moment and they get a little fearful because now you're making it real, right? So you're asking for that card, you're asking for that bank account, and there's this taboo-ness to the whole concept, and it's this uncomfortability that just leads us to either not do it at all, or just rely on the fact that they'll do it on their own time. And so because of that, it creates this mental stall. And so it makes it difficult for us to want to do it. But Rich, you were going to say something as well.
Well, look, Michael, you were born a salesman. So you came out of the womb, shook the doctor's hand, and negotiated for an innie rather than an outie, right? I mean, that's just how it went down. Okay. So it may not partake to you, but I can tell you, when I was a young man and I first had to learn how to sell, the thing that I felt most icky about, I was challenged with the most, was asking for money. And the reason I was icky about it is because money in most families and in most social settings is oftentimes a taboo subject. And so we're raised to think a certain way about money in most homes, not all homes, but most homes. We are raised, we're taught and trained how to deal with money socially and where we should talk about it and we shouldn't talk about it. And so money has a real energy to it. And it has, in some situations, unfortunately, a negative connotation. But at the end of the day, a salesperson who's going to be a sales professional, and this is a paradigm shift in thinking, especially for the owners of the businesses, becoming a sales professional. If you're going to be a sales professional, the very first thing you have to recognize is sales is not something that you do to the prospect. Sales is something you do for your prospect.
Thank you for
So
bringing
they
that up.
have a problem and you're going to provide them with a solution. And the way that we commemorate that deal is by making sure we have a transfer of monetary exchange. And that's just the way humans do that. Used to be, years ago, biblical times, they passed a sandal between each other, right? Or they walked around a sandal, or they did different things. They gave each other camels or whatever it was. There was not necessarily money as much as there was barter. But in our day and age, money, and now it's electronic transfers or Venmo or Zelle or whatever, is the currency that we use to say we're going to do a deal together. But if we have a negative feeling around it, often it has something to do with the way we were raised, the environment we were brought up in, and somehow, some way, the salesperson has become convinced that they're doing something to the prospect rather than for the prospect. And if they can make that paradigm shift in their thinking, then they can get more comfortable with asking for money. Does that make sense, Tom?
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's spot on and very understandable. And I agree with it completely. So here's another good question. We're talking a lot about sales. We're emphasizing that business owners and law firm owners, whether they're solopreneurs, small firm, that they need to be spending time doing this and doing it right. How much time should they be spending doing this versus actually lawyering and doing whatever it is to manage the actual business?
Yeah, I hate to say it depends, but Michael, right? It depends, right?
It does depend. There's a lot of factors to it, right? So it really comes down to capacity. So how much capacity do we have for each of those functions? Because at some point, if you fix your sales, you're now going to have all these clients to fulfill. And so now your capacity is going to have to kind of tip a little bit. And so at that point, it's traditionally where the business owner has to have an honest conversation with themselves and determine, do I want to grow? And if I want to grow, I've got to bring someone else into either one of these roles. And it depends on which one you determine you enjoy more. And that's traditionally what I default to. So if a lawyer likes law and they like the practice of law and they want to work on the fulfillment of the work, then they should work on the fulfillment of the work. And then they're going to have to replace themselves with, in law, either an attorney or a non-attorney salesperson, which now opens that capacity conversation again. But I think it really ultimately comes down to capacity.
Tom, do you mind if I share my screen again?
Yeah, absolutely. And while you're doing that, I'm seeing a few questions come through on chat and in the Q&A. If those are on the line, feel free to write your questions in either the Q&A function or the chat. We're going to save the last 10, 15 minutes specifically for questions. So we'll keep going. I do have a few more questions for them to answer myself, but we'll get to the audience's questions right at the end.
All right, so let's think about it this way. So let's say you've got, I'm going to pull an average firm. So let's say the average firm has their goal of getting to $500,000. I could say $1 million. I could say $2 million. It's irrelevant for this argument. But let's say that, okay, we can get to $500,000 and their clients, let's say on average, is worth $5,000 client value, right? So they've got a $5,000 client value. Right. And so if they've got $5,000 client value and they want to get to a $500,000 annually, then that means that we roughly have to do $40,000 a month. Right. We're talking about 40K per month is the goal, which means we need 8 clients. Does this make sense? Right. And that's with about 100% collection rate. That's a whole nother issue for a whole nother time. So we need 8 clients is the goal. All right, great. Well, if we say to ourselves, if we have a 50% close rate, well, that means we have to meet with 16 qualified prospects to close 8 deals, right? Well, okay, so now we got to get into our levers. So, because the question was asked was an interesting one. Should we charge for consults, right?
Great
so
question.
Now we have, how many leads do we have? We have how many sets do we have, appointments? We have how many shows do we have? So how many of the sets that we have showed up to their appointments? And then we have how many hired the firm or retained the firm, right? And so each one of these has this conversion, right? So you have the percentage of sets versus leads, the percentage of sets versus shows, and the percentage of shows versus hires. Well, if you say to yourself, I want 8 clients and you have a 50% close rate, and this, I'm picking middle of the road here, right? You got a 50% close rate. That means we need 16 prospects to show up. Well, if I have a 70% show rate, right? And that's what I have is a 70% show rate. Well, then in order to get the 16 to show up, I'm doing mental math here, but it's what, 25 or something like that, or 24? 16, 70% of 16 of 25, 24. So now I got to have 24 open slots, right? And if every slot is, if you're good, it's 30, but most law firms I meet with, when they start, don't give 30, they usually give 60 because they think they have to. So theoretically, if you want 8 clients and you have a 50% close rate and a 70% show rate, you need 24 one-hour slots a week. Well, 24 one-hour slots a week, you have to open up on your calendar each and every, this is in a month, not a week, 24 open slots in a month, right? So if we've got 24 open slots in a month and we got 4 weeks in a month, we need 6 slots per week. And if you go, okay, as an attorney that owns the firm, to get 8 clients, I can open up 6 slots a week on my calendar, of which 70% will show and 50% will buy at a $5,000 client value. That'll get me 8 clients over the course of a month. The $40,000 will take me to $480,000 and I'll hit my goal. So the depends is, where are you at? Now, if you're a $5 million firm and you want to get to $7 million, all that math it gets exacerbated, right? If you've got a $3,000 client value instead of a $5,000 client value, if you've got an $8,000 client value instead of $5,000 qualified, client value, it changes. If you close at 70 or 75%, if you have a show rate of 80% or 50%. And so based on this framework and these numbers, this is what Michael and I were talking about earlier, when you have a new client attraction program and you start measuring the truth, now you can start working backwards from, well, here's what I want. Now, how do I build a plan to go get it? So I want $500,000. I'm doing $200,000 now. I've got an average client of $5,000. I know I need 8 clients, and I know based on my current metrics, I'm going to have 6 slots a week. There's our plan, right? Now, we can do better if we increase the close rate. We get it to 70%. We can either hire more clients in the same 6 slots, or we can use less slots. And that really depends on what kind of law firm they want to build. Do they want to keep it small and keep it all? And by the way, this is true of a law firm or a home services business of any kind. It doesn't matter. Do you want to keep it small and keep it all? Or do you want to scale and grow? Either way, the number one goal is to be profitable. So that's number one key. You got to be profitable. But as long as we're profitable, you can choose either model, but you have to decide which one you want. And the way that once you decide which one you want, you can then reverse engineer that math to be able to figure out what your capacity needs to be. Is that all computing well? Did I do that okay with drawing?
Absolutely. And what we didn't even get into is the marketing side of it. How many leads I saw you write down leads, but obviously this is not a marketing discussion, so we won't go down that path. But that's an entirely extra layer on top that they need to be producing enough leads to cover that, because you know how much drop off there is with people requesting information and then not actually taking the appointment once that actually comes to be. So that's neither here nor there.
But you're right. There are levers in marketing as well, right?
Yep.
So the levers we created here, Michael, we do the same thing in marketing, correct?
There's levers across the board, and every single system you've got, there's levers to pull to be able to make differences in each of those facets.
What do you guys recommend in terms of reporting in reviewing these numbers, uncovering these numbers, having law firm owners and business owners be able to access their numbers and be able to work with you on them?
Michael, you mind if I take this one?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna illustrate this by telling a story. So right now we have a case study promotion we're running on Facebook. I'm not telling you this as a promotional material. I'm just telling you we interviewed a couple of our clients on profitability. One of them was Todd Farmer and Sam Wright out of Paducah, Kentucky. Now, if you're a solar eclipse fan, Paducah, Kentucky was on the path of 100% solar eclipse. So that's one of the claim to fames of Paducah, Kentucky right now. Prior to this, I don't think many people knew where Paducah, Kentucky was. Anyway, so Todd and Sam are out of this small town. Sam, they now do multiple 7 figures at a very, 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 very healthy profit margin. Law is law and home service business are probably 2 of the highest profit margin businesses there are on the planet. But anyway, and they talked about how they got there. And Sam said, when I got started, we used index cards with pen and paper. So the appointment setter's job was to report the numbers from the day before and put it on an index card and put it on Sam's chair. And when Sam came in the next morning, then he knew the index card was there. That's how they started the habit. Then they went to Google Sheets or Excel. And then from there, they started adding in their CRM or there's hundreds of them, right? But my point of this illustration is to start simple. Where most people get stuck is they start getting into I need this software to do this. No, you don't. As I said, I've been on this planet for a minute. So I'm 53. I've had several businesses. I've been in the insurance business. I've owned funeral homes. I've had a pet supply company, foreign currency exchange company, built a law firm, now a consulting firm. Okay, great. So I've been in a lot of different businesses. The pet supply company that I built to multiple millions was built with Walmart telephones, filing cabinets, and restaurant order books, right? So you do not need what everybody thinks you need in order to actually build a business. What you need is a system and a structure of sales. And then you need a manual way to track it the best you can. Of course, as you get bigger, things get harder and more sophisticated, and software makes your life easier. But don't overcomplicate it in the beginning. Michael, do you agree with that statement? I mean, you're younger and you love tech, so maybe you don't agree.
But yes and no. But in our business, we don't overcomplicate it either. We literally have our whole team is virtual, and so we have a virtual whiteboard, which is just a Google sheet that we're manually entering the data every day. We have a virtual concierge board where we're tracking our sets and our shows, and we're just manually writing it down. Do we have software? Yeah, we have software, but I find it way easier to use just the manual entry. It's way more streamlined, and it keeps things simple. The moment you overcomplicate is the moment you're likely to not do it because it becomes hard. So just keep it simple.
I like those points quite a bit, actually, because you see so many people out there that promote all of these different type of CRMs and software as almost like a crutch or some sort of silver bullet, like it's going to save the business if you adopt HubSpot or Salesforce, and they're great. Don't get me wrong, we're partners with a lot of those great CRMs out there. We work with them on behalf of our clients, but it's not going, if you don't understand the information that you're putting in, if you don't have the information cleanly to put it in, it's not going to somehow miraculously save the business. And I love that idea of stripping it down to just paper and pen, because most people out there are like, get out of the Stone Age. But that helps you understand the actual true numbers of the business and takes the onus off the software to be able to play the part that people believe that it's going to play. So awesome points there. Awesome points. Okay. One last question. I think we can take questions from the audience. Obviously, we're using averages here when you map out your system, and you just show that demonstration, and we're using averages of close rates and show rates and what that investment might look like. But you're going to have different close rates depending on where they come from. Word of mouth and referral is going to be very different than Facebook ads or whatnot. So again, I don't want to make this a marketing discussion, but how can folks do a better job of building stronger networks and trust and rapport out there with their communities or with their audiences, so that way those close rates and appointment booking rates are as healthy as they can be? Because that does play a role and does factor and play a role here.
I'll say that in two parts. So from my experience, I think with the proper structure, close rates, set rates, show rates, and close rates can actually be pretty similar no matter the form that they're coming from.
Okay.
That said, you can certainly help your trust factor, right? And so what we have found as of recent is to help your trust factor is build yourself as an authority in the space. So for most local businesses, if you started, posting content, or you started a local podcast, or you started a local newsletter, local email, whatever, if you just started that locally, you're already going to separate yourself from probably 95% of the other local businesses, because from a local perspective, not many businesses do that. Never mind do it right. Now, from a global perspective, obviously, there's a lot of noise out there. Still, can it be done? Yes, absolutely. But you just taking the step of establishing yourself as an authority. The other big way is to write a book, right? Establish yourself as an authority by writing a book, and then finding ways to give that book out as an opt-in and get an appointment, but starting to build yourself up as the expert and the authority in the space. Rich, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so great points, MPS. I would plus one in a couple of areas. So one of those would be, if you had to choose between being an author, celebrity, expert, and contributor in your space, or being an excellent closer in the closing room, setter, and getting people to show, I promise you'd rather opt for the latter rather than the former. It will make you so much more money. And if you go the other route, and you're attracted to the marketing, and you're attracted to the becoming an authority, and you don't fix the conversion rate, all we did is waste a bunch of leads. Like for some law firms, they say, I need more leads. That's my problem. Yeah. So in some cases, it's like giving them more leads would be a sin, because they're not converting the sins they already have. They're not converting the leads they already have. So I would say that, make sure you master your conversions first. Look, in our world, what we do, coaches and consultants, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you're probably being hammered by coaches and consultants right now. And never in the history of man has there ever been more content, free content given away, and global thought leaders being created. And we were told, you know, like, oh, you have to go and you have to post 7, 10, 12, 15 times a week. And I'm not saying they were wrong, but we tried that and we got exhausted. I mean, just out and out exhausted. I'm like, I'm thinking, like, I'm taping. Listen, literally, I recorded a video of me at the dentist office losing my front 2 teeth just to make an impact on TikTok. Okay, like.
Stop it.
No,
No,
true
he
story. Go
did.
to my TikTok
He
channel. It's
did.
there. You'll see me with a hole in my front mouth because I'm like, oh, this is a great opportunity. And don't get me wrong, we got a lot of comments, but we have proven that while that's important and there's a place for it, it's not the most important. And so we have proven time and time again that if you just identify the clear levers to pull on and you pull on them, everything else works. Everything. James Housen right now, EAY contestant for this year, Entrepreneurial of the Year contestant. He's a finalist, chosen out of all of our members. He's one of 4. Katonga Wright's another one. Will and Kelly Grafton's another one. And Jonathan Breeden's another one. 4 amazing humans. I guess they ordinary humans doing amazing things. And in each one of their spaces, they would tell you, like, they're not really pouring an awful lot of time into mastering their community and their posting in their community. What they're mastering is conversion and pulling the levers that work. Now, Jamie Miller, who been a client of mine personally for 12, 13 years, whatever it is now. He would tell you, he had us bring up a film crew and we filmed a little mini documentary of him and his wife and told their story. And in the story, his wife said, you know, when you first told us to write a book, I thought you were crazy. I'll tell you, I thought you were nuts. And she goes, and I'll be honest, I was wrong. The book was genius. It worked. Mark, using the book works. I mean, we believe in it so much that when our members join our program, we actually give them a book for free. Like, they don't have to write it themselves. We wrote it for them. Here you go. We think they should have it. But, like, that's not the first place we start. The first place we start is, did we fix your close rate? Did we fix your show rate and set rate, right? Are you charging the right number and are you profitable? That's where we start. And then we can do all the rest. I don't mean to poo-poo your question about bringing authority and trust. We think it's valuable, but it's not the most important thing to do.
Yeah, I'm glad that you took an alternative route. Yeah, that's awesome information and gives our viewers something to think about in terms of how they balance where they spend their time. Because a lot of times you have these quote unquote authority figures that are pushing for just becoming a content machine, and their entire schedule is booked out with trying to keep up with the Joneses related to that. And it doesn't warrant the results that they expected, and they think that it doesn't work, when really they just need to pick and choose their battles and figure out what is going to make the biggest impact.
I feel like I had hair before we started putting out content, man. I mean, it's content is
it's worth noting too that the moment we decided to shift our, because we had a solid foundation in stream, but we you know, a lot of the experts were pouring into us, telling us to put content out there. We gave it a shot. It was great. It was valuable. But the moment we put our focus where it needed to be, which is back on the front side of the funnel for us, everything just skyrocketed. And it's because that's where our focus went. So this is really a conversation of focus, and your focus should be on your conversions first. And then from there, you can start to build and pull the trust levers and the content and value levers and the authority levers.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have 5 minutes, so there was 2 questions that came in. The first you saw, which was, should we charge for consultations? And the second was, your examples deal with fees for services. What about personal injury attorneys on contingency and tips on getting the contract signed? So if we can spend the last couple of minutes here trying to get to those 2 answers to those 2 questions, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the personal injury first. So personal injury contingency, it's one of the practice areas, depending on where you're located in the country. It's usually a highly competitive market. So traditionally, when the prospect is calling in, most personal injury firms are trying to get them signed right then and there. And so my answer is, similar to us collecting a fee, we should be doing the same thing with a client service agreement or a contingency agreement right there on that call. And so we should whatever our document sending service is, right? We should pull it up. We should send it out with the prospect there on the phone and have them sign it with us there on the phone. And the question of tips on getting the contract signed, well, that's how we do it. And so we do it with them right there on the phone. The key is delivering that with confidence. So if the prospect senses hesitation, like you feel it's weird that you're doing it, then they're going to feel weird that they're being asked to do it. So if you just make that a seamless, normal part of your conversation, like, all right, yeah, perfect. So here's the next step. We're going to send you over the agreement right now, ready to rock and roll. Let me know when you got it. Perfect. Go ahead and pull that up. And if you have any key points in there that are important for the prospect to know that may be a big question point, you can let them know, hey, you know, this section, this section, this section, here's what's important to know. All right, perfect. When you're ready, you could go ahead, you could complete that, and then let's go ahead and get your onboarding booked, and always lead into your next step. So never leave that conversation without having your next conversation booked. That would be my tip from the personal injury perspective.
Yeah, and to plus one on what Michael said, you don't get there without building the emotional connection through the script and the structure so that it's an easy yes to go ahead and have that signed. And there's software you can use to make that easier. You can get DocuSign to work with Zoom, and you can literally open it up on the screen and have them sign right through Zoom, and it's cool and slick, and there's ways to do it, but that's irrelevant. What's really relevant is building the emotional connection, allowing them to make a logical justification about why they should retain the firm, and making sure we clearly ask for the order for them to sign it right now. In the old days, you were kneecap to kneecap with your prospects. Well, today we're on Zoom and virtual phone consults with our prospects. So we've got to be creative in the way that we get this done. Sometimes we could do it through technology. Sometimes we just have to email it to them and say, listen, I'll stay on the phone with you while you sign it just to see if you have any questions. But the key is that the client or the salesperson has to be driven to make sure they get that contract signed. Just because there's not, in a contingency base, the currency isn't money. The currency is the signature on the document, right? That's the currency. And so now what we want from them is a signature. It's no different than getting paid in a fee-based firm. Don't get off that call unless you get it signed. So a deal isn't a deal in fee-based unless we get paid. A deal isn't a deal in contingency unless we have it signed. That's the rule.
Right.
As to the charge per consultation, it really depends. So it depends on practice area. It depends on, do you use attorney or non-attorney consultants? Oftentimes, it depends on what your overall flow is. So generally speaking, people say, should I charge a consultation fee? You should charge a consultation fee if you have one of two primary problems. If you have more consultations than you have time for in a 72-hour window, and you're booking out 96 hours or a week long or more than a week, and what you have to do is get rid of the tire kickers to shorten those down to only have the true people you're meeting with, adding a consultation fee will help you add a filter. Now, truth be told, what you really want is you want more consultants so that you can open up more gaps in the calendar so that you don't have to schedule out a week or two in advance. But if you don't have the time or ability to do that, the one way to do that by filtering is adding a consultation fee. The second reason why you may want to add a consultation fee is if the attorney is the one meeting with them and they end up meeting with a lot of tire kickers and they just don't have time because they would be billing at $500 an hour had they not met with that person who really wasn't serious or couldn't afford the firm. And so by charging a fee, you could solve that problem. However, this does cause two really, really major problems in the overall perfect client lifecycle, like we talked about earlier. If you remember, I drew those lines and we were converting from leads to sets, from sets to shows, and shows to hires. And when you charge a consultation fee, the right way to charge a consultation fee is to collect the consultation fee during that initial phone call. Because if you don't, your show rate's likely going to suffer because they're going to go call somebody else until they can meet with somebody who doesn't charge them a consult fee. And now you've lost that prospect. So if you get them to pay for the consultation fee over the phone when they schedule the appointment, well, now the likelihood of them showing up and buying goes through the roof. But Now you have to have a different type of individual setting appointments. An appointment setter that sets an appointment without charging a fee is a different type of animal, human, than the appointment setter who can actually charge a fee and ask for a credit card. As we talked about earlier, asking for money is a difficult thing for a lot of people, and the entry-level appointment setter, oftentimes as a salesperson, is very nervous about that. So that adds a complication there. The second place that this adds a complication is when they charge a consultation fee. A lot of attorney and law firm owners specifically, now if you're not a law firm owner and you're in a home service business, that's fine. But a lot of business owners think, well, I charged a fee, so I have to give them something of value. So I need to either solve their problem or I need to let them meet with an expert. And neither of those are actually true. We were using the fee for a filtering purpose. The goal of the initial consultation, and this is if they don't learn anything from today and they just learn this thing. Michael, what is the goal of the initial consultation?
Goal of the initial consultation is to get the prospect to retain the firm, not to provide the prospect with their solution to whatever their problem is. And so it's to get the prospect to retain the firm.
If they remember that, they win. It solves a lot of problems.
Awesome. Awesome. We want to respect people's time, and we are certainly appreciative of everybody sitting here today. We're going to send the playback link for those that registered that couldn't make it. Rich, MPS, I'm so thankful that you're able to give your time and your knowledge here, and we're able to share all this great information with us. We do a lot of these talks on marketing topics, so I was really pleased that we were able to dive deep into this topic here, specifically on sales. And I think it makes a big difference for business owners and law firm owners and how they're running their firms more efficiently. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your partnership with Smith.ai as well.
Hey, we appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you do for our members, the work that you do for us in answering our phones. We think that you really are a vital part of the overall ecosystem of conversion from lead over into a client and serving their clients well after they become a client. And so we appreciate your work, and we appreciate you having us on. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Tom.
All right. Bye, guys.